Okay. Chapter 12 begins with stating North Americans too often assume that people elsewhere hold comparable values or would at least if they were given the opportunity. This chapter explores the fact that standards for ethical communication aren't widely shared throughout the world. Dr. Combs came in and discussed this topic, and I feel like he gave a really great insight. He discussed that how there aren't any universal or transcultural principles that we all share for communication. Um, and throughout his lecture, he really compared the Western approach to Taoism. Combs discussed Western rhetoric as persuasion is paramount and winning is everything. So, how we aren't afraid to alter the world to win, and we like to live at a fast pace, a life that expects perfection and competition. And compared to Taoism, it's very different. It depends. Taoism depends on the central values of interdependence, balance, harmony, and the natural way of living. So, almost like an effortlessness way of going about life. I feel like they think that the world shouldn't be altered, and for the most part, we connect through balance and harmony, and it's what keeps the world going. So I know that Dr. Combs gave the example of the wave and how it just all felt right, and like taking your time and not living such a fast-paced life. Um, I feel like the lecture really created an insight on ethics and how they're different everywhere, especially depending upon the culture. Something that may be considered ethically wrong in one country could be completely acceptable in another. For example, the Cambodian American high school students, whenever they were brought into the courtroom, they showed obedience by putting their head down and being submissive to the judge as they were being scorned. And the judge wanted them to look them in the eye. And so there was a definite gap and disconnect in the court, and I feel like that was because of cultural differences in ethics. Combs' lecture really, and the chapter, helps us examine the ethics, particularly in intellectual property. So during the lecture, we talked about Martin Luther King Jr.'s um, speech, I Have a Dream, and how he stated quotes from religious, philosophical, and literal sources without referring to them or citing them. We talked about how this may be due to this is probably due to the time period and his history and how church affected him and like communions, how the communion was, how he thought of it as a persuasive speech and how he could share these ideas um, openly. And um, whereas other people challenge the fact that this may be plagiarism, and the history states that he needs to cite these sources. So I feel like um, that example that was brought up in the lecture, there was a gap in opinions into what was ethical or not. Can words be property? Can you use other people's words and ideas in an ethical manner, or are words and ideas created to be shared? Another question that has been raised is, do we really need a new digital media ethic? And I feel like increased vulnerability generated by news media requires definitely increased responsibility. More and more videos, music, shows, etc., are being more and more accessible, and so there's a lot of gray area. We don't really know um, if it's right or wrong because it's so much a part of our culture now. A lot of people do it. I mean, I know that a lot of us raised our hands whenever Dr. Waters asked us if we had illegally downloaded anything from the internet. So I feel like we do have a responsibility to respond ethically. Um, Illegally downloading has become the norm in today's society. As I had said, millions of people do it. Um, but just because the property isn't tangible, or just because you can't touch it, or it's not physical property, doesn't mean that it can't be stolen. I know that we talked in class about Taylor Swift taking her music off of Spotify because she feels as though there should be a relationship between an artist and a listener, and essentially through consumption, and that, and she was bringing to light the fact that music is an art and it should be paid for. I'm not saying that Taylor Swift couldn't lose a few bucks. I mean, she's obviously rich, but she did start and open a discussion on the worth of music, and I feel as though if something is always is always free, then it's over time it will lose its value. And overall, as everyday users, um, we're going to be tested, and we're going to have to use and establish what is right and wrong through our culture and our morals and our beliefs. And so I definitely think that it's going to vary depending upon the person and case by case. So